Welcome everyone to the July edition of Backstage Community Sessions. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Himanshu. I go by Orko Hunter on GitHub and desktop. And let's run through the agenda for this session. First of all, we have Francesco, who's going to talk about Backstage roadmap. And this is exciting. We recently updated our roadmap, so Francesco is going to talk about it. Next up, we have Mike and me again, doing a demo of our recent work on Node.js templating engine improvements. So we'll talk about that. After that, we'll have Ruben to talk about composable homepage. It's exciting stuff. Then we have Pallavi and Heather from Splunk giving us a demo. Then we'll have a contributor spotlight of the month. I won't talk much about it. Let's keep up the hype. Then we'll have Q&As, folks who have posted comments on GitHub and in the chat. So feel free to use the Zoom chat whenever you want. We'll make sure so that the host or whoever is the demo, whoever is giving the demo sees it and responds to it. And that's all. That's all for the hour. So let's begin by Francesco. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Himanshu. I will be fast and quick, but I hope also sharing some exciting news. So we are very happy, and I'm very proud and happy to share that finally we updated the roadmap page in the open source version of Backstage. And so I'm posting the link in the chat, but again, it's visible and pretty easy to reach as part of the official documentation. So you will find there what is already ongoing and planned to happen in this quarter, so July, August, and September, and what we are aware it is going to happen. You will find there also a future forecasting that is not a commitment, but it's something that we have in our radar for the future after September, so since October and next. So now, I mean, we did our homework. Now it's your turn, guys, because there are two main actions that I would kindly ask you. First of all, provide feedback, because we would like to hear from you what you are working on, how do you plan to contribute, because we would like to make this roadmap a community-driven roadmap. And so we want to hear also what you plan to do and you're committed to do in this quarter. And we will be glad to include this as part of the public roadmap. But we would like also to discuss the current version of the roadmap to understand what you would like to see there, because we would like to start working on the future version of the roadmap. So let me stop here. If you are interested to talk about the roadmap, talk about what is inside, and maybe start thinking about what we could do better, differently, and of course together, let me know and let us know. I will be very happy to have a conversation with you and make it better. Thank you very much. Let me thank also all the contributors to this amazing event. And yeah, Himanshu, I'll give you back the microphone.
Cool. So James is interested in knowing how best to provide feedback on this roadmap.
Good question. So as part of the documentation, you will find how to contribute to the roadmap. You will see, first of all, a documentation in the open how to contribute to the project in general. Then you can raise an issue as part of the GitHub project that is public. And third, you can also book a slot together with the Backstage team, more technical, more roadmap, more general in the way you want, and have a conversation directly with us. And we will be very happy to talk with you about the future, what we are doing, how we are doing, things like that. So if you go directly to the page, to the roadmap page, in the section how to contribute and how to influence and how to contribute to the roadmap, you will find all the links there.
Thank you, Francesco. So yeah, if you have any other questions or roadmap, feel free to share in the chat, and Francisco will be looking out for questions there, or we can just talk about it later. So next up, we have Mike and me giving a demo on scaffolder templating improvements. So I would request Mike to share his screen. We made a presentation, so exciting. It has got the theme you're all familiar with. So over to you, Mike. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Himanshu. So hi, folks. My name is Mike Lewis. I work here at Spotify on Backstage. And I hope you can all see my screen. Can I get some thumbs up if you can? Brilliant. Cool. So Himanshu and I are going to tell you a little bit about some changes that have recently been made to the way that templating works in Backstage. So I'll jump straight into that. We're not going to spend a ton of time over it, but of course, very open to any questions that you have. So feel free to post questions in the chat and we'll answer them if we can. So yeah, the first thing we want to talk about is new templating action that we've introduced. So before we started working on this, there was only one templating action available, which was fetch cookie cutter. And this templating action worked very well, but it had some challenges associated with it for new adopters. Specifically, it depended on a CLI tool called cookiecutter, which had to be installed and available before the templating action would work. That's a bit of a pain for people that are starting out with Backstage, because they start using it and they find they need a CLI tool installed and they have to stop doing what they're doing, go away and mess around with the software installed on their computer or run things through Docker. It just introduced a bunch of pain that we wanted to work around. And kind of make the experience smooth so that new adopters could get straight into running templates and building projects. So what we've done is introduce a new action called fetch template. And fetch template is very similar to fetch cookie cutter. The key difference between the two is that fetch template is based on Nunjux, which is a Mozilla implementation of Ginger 2 templating. And it only depends on NPM packages, which means that yarn install is all you need to be able to run templates. It includes a cookie cutter compatibility mode, but there are some changes by default from the standard cookie cutter templates, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. And it is the default templating action for new Backstage projects. So what that means is the configuration that you get out of the box when you start with Backstage contains templates that are based on fetch template, not templates that are based on fetch cookie cutter. Again, that doesn't mean you can't use fetch cookie cutter if you want to. It just means that if you start a new Backstage project, you're going to get these templates by default. But we have examples of both that are linked in these slides, which we'll share afterwards. So a couple of details about what the differences are between the two. So the first difference is in cookie cutter templates, you need to wrap variables in double braces. And in fetch templates, you need to wrap them in $double braces. The way that you reference the variables themselves is slightly different. So in cookie cutter, you reference them with cookiecutter dot variable name. In fetch template, you reference them with values dot variable name. And the JSONify filter is not available, so you can't use that to convert objects to the JSON stringified representation. Instead, you use dump, which is the built-in Nunchucks flavor of JSONify. Again, we have a cookie cutter compat mode that you can use, which makes all of those things go away, and these templates start working exactly like cookie cutter ones. So that means that what you can do if you want to try this is migrate by switching your fetch cookie cutter actions in your templates to fetch template actions and enabling the cookie cutter compat flag, and you should be able to get right into running templates, and things hopefully should just work. Alongside the changes that we've made to the new action, we've also shuffled around the sample templates a little bit. So previously sample templates lived in Backstage on GitHub, and those templates are still there for now, but there's a new home for the sort of templates that we're expecting to keep around for a long time, which is in a separate repo called sample templates, which is linked on this slide. Again, I'll share these afterwards. The default Backstage configuration already points to these new templates. So again, when you start Backstage, you're going to start by using these new templates in the sample templates repo, and they're based on fetch template. There is a fetch cookie cutter based template in there to play around with too. So those sample templates contain both fetch template templates and one fetch cookie cutter template to give you the both options to look at. One thing to highlight is the old sample templates in Backstage are going to go away in the next few weeks. So we're going to look at the process for letting people know about that. We think there are some people referring to templates directly using Git URLs. So we want to make sure that we minimize the chance that we break any of those people when those things go away. But we'll be sharing more details about that on GitHub. So keep an eye out if you're one of those people that may be affected by that. And as always, our recommendation is that you fork templates, even if you're not making changes to them directly, so that you can manage your template yourself, rather than being prone to changes that Backstage engineers make in the future to the sort of base example templates. So that's it for the new template action that we've introduced. I think Himanshu is going to jump in now and talk about some potential upcoming changes to the syntax of template YAML files themselves.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so if you go next, let's take a look at how a software template looks like. It's basically two sets of files. The first one is the template.yaml itself, which gets registered inside Backstage. And the second one is something we call skeleton. It contains all your files and folders, which your new project, whatever you generate using this template, will have by default. So if it's a React SR template, it will have all the React files. Both of these things are templated, which is interesting. So the skeleton is templated using fetch template or fetch cookiecutter or whatever action you have on templating. But the template.yaml itself is also templated. And if you go to the next slide, you can see where exactly this is done. So we take input from users about what should be the component ID of the software that you're creating, and description, etc., etc. Imagine this is like something like a CI workflow that you write, very similar to GitHub Actions, but not exactly. But this is a place where you can also write template variables, and the syntax here is quite different. You have to add inverted commas so that YAML doesn't parse those in its default parsing syntax. You have to add these parse repo URL, or JSONify goes in the front instead of the back. It's quite different from your Ginger 2 based syntax, and it's done using a library called handlebars. If you go next. So the goal here is that we want to unify the syntax. So for example, if a user is writing a software template, you shouldn't have to memorize two types of syntaxes. All you need is just one, and you should be able to write your template.yaml as well as your skeleton files. And if you go to the next slide, and the second goal is that users should be able to substitute non-string variables as well. As of now, it is possible to do that in handlebars, but again, the syntax makes it difficult. So we want our template.yaml templating to be much more powerful. And yeah, Ben can add more, you can ask more questions, and we can talk about it. This is still an open RFC. So if you go next, this link below is an open RFC. Go have a look at it. Throw in your suggestions, and let's decide on how we want to proceed with this. There's a migration guide, as Mike was mentioning here, all the things about cookiecutter, compare flag, etc. You can find it over there. And all of this work is tracked in the meta issue, which is the second link. And drum rolls, can you go next slide? Hey, oh, wait. It got at the end, but yeah, we love this GIF on Backstage.io site, and we thought this is a good thank you slide. So yeah, that's our presentation.
Himanshu team, there is a question. Thank you for the presentation. There is a question in the chat. Maybe team, I don't know if you want to repeat it, providing a context for that. Do you want me to raise the question?
Yeah.
So the question is mainly about any reason why you're adding another template engine. For example, what Backstage maintainers prefer, or why, what is the suggestion using different tooling or engines as well? So what's the point of view?
So the reason for, reading this comment from Lochebi, others can add. So the reason for adding fetch template was basically that the out of the box, as Mike said, the out of the box experience should be really smooth. You shouldn't have to install tons of dependencies like Python, cookiecutter, or Docker even to try out software templates. You should just do yarn install and things should work. So that's the one reason. Second is that software templates is so powerful, you can run any action. So it's just not that there should be just one template. You can try out adding a third fetch templating action as well, and everything is just welcome. So, but I hope that answers the question, Reason.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think we want to be opinionated as much to give you something to get running with as quick as you can, but that's kind of it. Like if you want to add your own template language, and you're more than welcome to go ahead and do that. We just want to reduce the friction of someone getting up and started quickly. And cookie cutter for us was a big talking point on Discord a lot, of being able to add cookie cutter to the Docker files, and there's a lot of different ways to install it in different environments. So it's just much easier to go back to basics a little bit and kind of think of what do we expect the best user experience to be, and a one command install is really the way we want to go. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And the next question is very important for Mike. Where did you get that t-shirt? It's awesome. So you can.
And that would be telling. I can't reveal my sources.
Cool. All right. So let's move on to really exciting demo from Ruben on composable homepage. Ruben, over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Yes. So hello, my name is Ruben. I am interning here in the Pulp Fiction Squad over the summer, and I'm very excited to be here. I was also not briefed on this cool presentation template, so this is another one, but I hope you don't mind. So I will be quick. I will be talking about the composable homepage and where we're at with it right now. So first, we will look at the ask. It was an RFC. I will talk about our scope and what we're doing right now. We'll go through the personas we're keeping in mind when developing this, and finally, we will have a demo. So originally, it was an RFC by Oliver Sand, who I believe is here now as well, issue 5416. And the problem he outlined is that the catalog is currently the starting page of Backstage, which is only one of the things in Backstage, and it's probably not what the users are looking for. So we want to solve this by introducing a composable homepage that should also be configurable on multiple levels. So the scope here is that currently we are just determining the API, and this is primarily where we want your feedback right now. As soon as we have an API that we feel comfortable with, we can start developing these so-called homepage components that are used to compose the homepage. And we have some ideas for homepage components that we would like to introduce, such as a search component, a component for open PRs. One suggestion from yesterday was a welcome experience component. But we hope that you all can contribute with your own ideas and be able to build up this ecosystem. And then outside of scope, as of now, is any sort of user customizability, such that the end user could customize it on their own. We're just looking to stabilize the API right now. So that's that. And when we define this API, we are primarily concerned with two personas. The first is the app integrator. And their responsibility would be to compose the homepage and determine the layout. They should not need to know anything about how the components work. They should just have full ability to determine the way the components render and how they interact with each other in the layout. And then we believe that the component developers should not need to worry about presentation. They should be primarily concerned with content. They do have their own surface where they have full control, but overall, that should be handled by the app integrators. The component developers will also define the interface for configurability and interactivity. So they do this on an app integrator level, where they could pass props down to the components, and the end user can access something that we call settings, which I will demo now. So let's see if I can smoothly switch my screen. Can you still see it? Thumbs up.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Then let's get going with the demo. So the purpose of this demo here is that I want to show you how you can create your own components, but it's also an opportunity to get some feedback on how the API looks and feels now from the perspective of the two personas. So right now we have an empty homepage here, and we want to develop a new component. When deciding where this component lives, we kind of have three cases. The first one is if the component doesn't fit with an existing plugin. For instance, if we want to develop a homepage component that shows your recently visited pages, there's no plugin that kind of relates to that. In that case, we envision that this component should live within the home plugin. Otherwise, if you're developing a kind of homepage component representation of a plugin, like a smaller version of a plugin, then we believe that this can live within the plugin itself. And there are two cases for that. Either it's in the mono repo of the Backstage, where you just include it here, but it's also fine if it's in its own repo, like we will see here. And then it could just be introduced as a dependency. So what we will develop is a recent PRs homepage component, and Rody does this very well, and they are not in the mono repo, but I just included like a mock representation of it to make the demo smooth. So what we'll do first is to create a new file that we call content, which is like the base of the component. And because live coding isn't too fun, I will just paste it here. And then we import it here in the plugin file. And this is probably the part where we're most eager to hear your feedback. This is the API from a homepage component developer's perspective. I won't go too deeply into what this extension creator does, but they need to import the separate parts of the homepage component separately. Please have a look at the PRFC to see more how this works. But yeah, this is the API from the homepage component developer's perspective. So we export this component from the plugin. And then the homepage, so the app integrator is free to just include it. So this is the API from the app integrator's perspective. They have this specific rendering component, which we call the homepage component card, which renders a homepage component like a card, as we can see. And this is also their way of customizing stuff. So for instance, this component supports a title. So here they can add a new title, and this renderer will support that. So yes, this is not a very exciting homepage component. So we can add more to it. So for starters, let's add a context that will actually introduce some functionality. So I will grab it yet again from here. And then we add this as well to this extension creator. Like that. And then I will also just update the JSX, this thing returns. And now, hopefully, we can see some recent PRs. So whenever we follow this link, we get to a recent PR here. So this way, the content of the homepage component card gets to interact with this context that we defined here. Moving on, we can also add some settings to this component. So I will yet again copy this in, and then we add this to the export as well. Live coding for you, and now a cogwheel should appear. So by pressing this, we will open up a modal where you can add some settings for this component. So for instance, we can change the repository we want to fetch the PRs from. So there's that. And the final thing we can introduce on this homepage component card is a set of actions. So I will add them here, the actions. And again, we just have to add them to this extension creator. And they should appear here. So here we have a merge everything button, so that's good. So we go to all the open PRs and we, of course, merge them. Everything's merged. We can see it up to, it's merged now. So this is a very simple example of how a homepage component can be introduced. And we hope that you will be able to add to this soon enough, and we look forward to hearing your comments in the here.See. So that's it for the demo. So I open it up for questions if anyone has anything.
Wow, Ruben, totally showing off power of composability. Really cool stuff. So yeah, I'll go through the chat one by one. So Tim asks, where are the settings saved?
Yes, that's a great question. Part of this, if we look at this roadmap here, we're currently not confident in how the user customizability will look. We know there's a storage API that we're going to interact with. You could do it in local storage, but we're not quite confident in how customizability on every level will be saved yet.
Cool. Do you think those PRs were actually merged just for Eric's sake?
Yeah. So
great.
Yeah, that saves you a lot of work.
Yeah, totally. So if you have more questions about homepage or composability in general, feel free to put it in chat. And thank you so much, Ruben. Pretty awesome presentation.
Thank you. I will link to the here.See in the chat.
Yeah, please do. All right. So moving on, we have Pallavi and Heather from Splunk, and they're going to demo. Over to you, Pallavi.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
So before we get started with the presentation, I would like us to do a round of intros. Heather, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, everyone. Nice to meet everyone digitally. I'm Heather. I've been at Splunk for about 8 months, and I'm a tech lead on the project, being Phonebook.
Tony, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Tony Tam. I'm the engineering manager for the engineering productivity team. So I have the honor of working with Pallavi and Heather on this.
Thank you, Tony. Hi everyone, my name is Pallavi. I'm a product manager at Splunk. Me, along with few others, we own the PM function for the tooling used by our engineering community. So let's get started with the presentation. Today in our agenda, we'd like to give you a background of why Backstage, why a solution like Backstage, why Backstage, and then we're very excited to talk to you and showcase the custom features we added on top of Backstage that makes it more suitable for our use cases and Splunkers. And then we'd like to walk you through the technical implementation of some of those on the roadmap. Please feel free to give your feedback on whatever you see on in the presentation. We have a few other Splunkers as well in the call. They should be able to answer. Okay. So historically, as Tony said, right, we are all in the engineering productivity team. So we have various mechanisms and metrics to gather feedback from our engineers as they write, test, and deploy their code. So two sets of feedback, or two themes of feedback, they stood out in the last like 6 to 7 months, right? So the first feedback has been that we lack a paved road or a standard way of doing the right thing. So some of the team members felt that to do a certain thing, maybe to install local environment on their laptop, every team has, or many people felt that they are having to fail first to learn. If this is such a commonly done or performed action by so many engineers, why should everybody learn on their own? Why can't there be an opinionated way or a standard way of doing it? Right, that was number one feedback. The second feedback is finding people who are subject matter experts is very hard, right? During when they perform and they're interacting with so many microservices or APIs, whatnot, right? It's important that along with the documentation, when they bump into challenges or escalations or something, they should know who the subject matter expert is. They felt that it was if you look in our Slack channel also, you'll see that this question is asked quite a bit. Who do I ask for this? Who do I ask for that, right? So every time we see that, we feel like, hey, you know what, we should have solved this problem a long time ago. So that is some of the context behind Backstage. So so we thought that maybe we should productize this feedback, right? People can do so many things with the feedback. We thought we should have a portal, like we didn't even think of Backstage at that point. We should have something like a developer portal that can do some of these things, right? It should be the single source of trusted information for the engineering community. Then they should be able to discover golden paths of how to do X. And there should be an engine behind the scenes working that is actively surfacing the subject matter experts. Right? We didn't want a passive system that detects or identifies SMEs, something like an engine that is computing who's a subject matter expert and surfacing at the relevant places. Then there is a social engagement concept as well, which I'll get to a little bit later. So then at the same time, we realized that our SRE team is actually trying to solve a similar problem with a service catalog. At the same time, they say, right, when you want something, like, everybody will help you out. So we realized somebody actually suggested that there is this thing called Backstage, and they're trying to solve, they tried a similar problem, right? So that's how we did a POC of Backstage, and we realized that, what, maybe it's a good starting point for us. So that is how we started implementing Backstage for our own use cases. So the name you see, Ping Phonebook, is Splunk's implementation of Backstage. So you see a small box out there, right? Personas. We're thinking about, as we are enhancing the user interface, right, to think about what workflows we should be optimizing. So we are thinking about our personas in terms of two: contributors and learners. Primarily, contributors are the people who contribute code and content to the Backstage. As a service owner, as somebody you can think of as a contributor. As a team manager, right, they're also a contributor, in the sense that whenever some changes are occurring in their team or services or documentation, they're coming to the Ping Phonebook and updating the code to make sure that the information is up to date. The learners is rest of the engineering community who's actively learning about each other, learning about other teams, learning about the services. So I'm very interested in how you're all thinking about the personas for your own implementations of the Backstage. So now I would like to showcase you some of the custom features we have added on the Backstage. Okay. So as you see here, right, we quickly realized, I'm sure we all know that the services teams, they're all made of people, right? We are building software for people. So we thought user profiles is is at the center of a Ping Phonebook. So as you see here, we have done some extra additions to the profiles, but this is the profile of Heather, right? She owns certain services. So you can see the services here. You can click on this and it will display the services that she owns. And she has a certain preferred modes of communication. In fact, some users have an option to enter about themselves, especially some of our leadership. We want to know them a little bit more. So they have an option to provide something like a README section as well, which you don't see here. Then the browse is actually the very interesting part. So we at Splunk, we are helped by our fellow Splunkers a lot in our day-to-day activities. We just thank them in Slack and nobody knows about it, right? So we wanted to bring some openness to it. So that's how we started thinking about introducing browse in the Ping Phonebook. So I'd like to walk you through the life cycle of browse. So you can see her, right? So she has a lot of browse, which obviously shows that she does awesome work. So let's say if somebody is impressed and they want to give a bravo to her, right? So they can click on give a public bravo to Heather, right? Then they can see all the different types of bravos that exist, right? These bravos can be anything. But we wanted to drive some behavior changes as well. So we recently introduced a code review bravo so that people are incentivized to do timely and thorough reviews, code reviews. Then above and beyond, there are many bravo types. Maybe we'll replicate some, we'll introduce more, but it's highly flexible system. So once I give a bravo to her, an email is generated, automatic email is generated, which is sent to the manager and sent to Heather as well with my comments. I can give comment about, hey, you know what, she helped me in designing this, whatever, right? So not only that, actually, we Splunk this data as well for the dashboarding and visualization, or even to know what's going on, right? So this is a small subset of the dashboards you can see. right? You can filter by type of the Bravo, and you can see the language that people are using when they're giving a Bravo, and you can see who has done it. I blocked it, but who has sent it, who is receiving it, the type of the Bravo. So this is a nice integration with Splunk we have for Bravos. So next up is Heather will talk to you about the customizations we did in the service catalog.
Cool. So currently, the way we're populating everything in the catalog is through static YAML files stored within the same repository as our code. That being said, that's not what we want to do long term. So for the future, we'd like to be able to create an S3 reader and populate services that way. If you're on the Discord channel, I believe that the SRE team has been posting conversations about this, and also they have a draft PR about to implement this. So something that we're interested in pushing upstream. And another change is adding UI changes to surface more data about the components. So if you saw earlier in the user profile, if you notice, there was a show all button. So that actually shows all the components that a user owns / groups as well. And so another customization that we've added for doc related changes is historically at Splunk, a lot of our documentation is already created through GitLab templates or other places like in Confluence. So our ideal was actually generating documentation components with a custom annotation defined in YAML files. So what we have now in these YAML files is just something under metadata annotations, and that is an external URL. And so for an example that you'll see in a screenshot later, we have something called the workshop component, and there's an associated workshop doc that's automatically generated as a result of a custom processor that we added. So next slide, please. Cool. So this is an example of us generating documentation with a custom annotation. So once we add this in the YAML file, we have, as pictured in box 1, this view tech docs link, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. But when we click on that, that actually leads to an external document, not a document that's hosted within Backstage. And so we decided to use this implementation over just adding a simple link, as you can see on the right-hand side, as we didn't want to confuse the user experience with having to look at links in the right-hand side versus just clicking on this button that points to the documentation. Next slide, please. And so in terms of UI changes to surface more data about components, you can see in box 2 that there's a show all button now. So when you click on that, a dialog opens, and that shows all of the services, documentation, APIs, and so on that the user or group owns. So in this screenshot, it's a group, it's our team engineering productivity. And then for box 1, these tiles are all clickable. So those weren't previously clickable before, at least when we were implementing. So those actually go and show in a dialog as well, like what services and documentation, and so on, that the user or team owns. Next slide, please. And so here's a screenshot of the dialog that opens. So this shows lots of different information about the APIs and services. And then in the previous example, we had the workshop website component, and then the workshop docs component, which was not resulted from creating a YAML file, but was actually created dynamically with a custom processor that added this workshop docs component. Next slide, please. Cool. And then finally, we have this group authoring interface. So we didn't want to be tied down with like a code review process when it came to creating groups. And so we are moving towards a state where we're able to create a group through the Backstage or Pink Phonebook UI. And so this is something that we're also currently working on. Next slide, please. Cool. So in summary, we just covered a couple of customizations, user profiles, Bravos, and then for catalog customizations, we covered how we're covering documentation, in terms of, and also UI changes to surface more data about components. And finally, a group authoring interface. And we would love any feedback on which of these customizations you might find helpful. Feel free to comment in the Zoom chat, or we're going to open up quite a few RFCs and also issues for some of these changes. So feel free to comment on those as well. And cool. So going on to the technical implementation, we have service back plugin that we call the Splunk org plugin. And this supports all the custom functionality that you just saw outlined previously. So this is very similar to the Lighthouse service plugin, if you've previously seen that. And so this is very closely modeled after the Lighthouse plugin as well. So it's a Node Express server. And one difference is that we use a NoSQL database to store a lot of the user group and Bravo data. And that's just because I preferred the schemaless design there, but definitely open to migrating to Postgres and any other suggestions that the community might have. So the org service plugin is responsible for pulling data. It pulls data about users for LDAP, and it's just a single source of truth about user group and Bravo data. And then so we read and write heavily from this external service through the org service backend plugin. And so another thing to note is that the org service and our Backstage implementation all live within the same Kubernetes namespace. And so that way there's quick and easy communication between the two services. Next slide, please. So our plan is to contribute a lot of these new functionalities upstream, and we'd love to hear from the community about how to do so, and also any changes that might be helpful in order to get this these contributions up, because we want to make sure that this is as flexible and generalized as possible. We are going to write RFCs with more detailed technical implementation details to get feedback from the community. There's a few already in flight, so I've linked them, and I think we could probably share these slides afterwards. But there's one on Bravos and there's one on users and group customizations. Some general questions I think we hope to address is, should we continue down the NoSQL path with MongoDB, or should we migrate to Postgres or support both? And also, should we maintain an external service or move to Backstage hosted backend plugin within the Backstage mono repo? And then finally, after we have those conversations, then we'd like to create PRs after addressing all feedback. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Heather. So yes, so I'd like to, in any project, right, long term, when you have such a big problem space to solve and also white space, there are some unknowns, right? Challenges, unknowns is something I would like to call them. So regarding golden paths, we don't have a strong opinion on how we want to solve it, whether it's going to be like a documentation or whether we are going to leverage the software templates by Backstage, or GitLab also offers templating, and we use GitLab quite heavily, right? Some of our repos are in GitLab. So that's one unknown we are facing. How do we go about implementing the golden paths, especially with regards to software templates? The second thing is getting service owners to treat Phonebook as a system of record is a challenge, right? The second is editing data, keeping the service catalog up to date. It goes hand in hand with the previous challenge, meaning that many of the changes that has to happen in Phonebook, they require a code review process, meaning that they need to submit an MR, open the repo component, change the YAML file and stuff like that. But if I want to make a small change, that's a big barrier to entry for many people. So how do we make editing a little bit more easier? Is something that we are actively working on, as you have seen in Heather's present slides as well, that we are trying to solve it for the groups at least. But this remains a challenge for us. The next is we are very excited to keep working on iterating on developing a pink Phonebook for our community. Some of them are self-explanatory, right? Reading component definition files instead of from a central repository. We would like to be able to read from the service repository, and editing the group entities through the UI. So I'd like to elaborate on the exporting to Confluence. It might seem like an anti-pattern, right? You're saying that you want this to be a single source and you want to export into Confluence. Critical mass of actually people we still use Confluence. They actively use Confluence. So our idea behind exporting this is that we'll still treat Ping Phonebook as a system of record, but we will export the data to Confluence and probably link back to Ping Phonebook, right? So how do we amplify the accurate, right, data, or the relevant active data from in Ping Phonebook to various other sources where our people are on. So that's one of the thought behind exporting to Confluence. Whether we'll export entire data or a little bit of nuggets we'll export and drive them back to Ping Phonebook, we have no idea, but that's what. And we are very excited to leverage Kubernetes plugin as well, because many of our services are deployed on Kubernetes. So it'll be very helpful for the service owners to be able to see the health of the services or pods or whatnot on the Ping Phonebook as well. This is what we have got on roadmap. So this is what we thought where we were, right? Interestingly, 2 weeks ago, our sales engineering organization, they reached out to us and they said that they are doing a POC of Backstage for the field catalog, right? Field solutions catalog. All along, we have been only thinking from the view of solving a problem for the engineering community. But we have a very interesting perspective and interesting enhancements that we would like to make on Ping Phonebook that will solve some of the problems that they're trying to do for the asset management lifecycle of the field assets. So in a different forum or whenever possible, we would love them to showcase what they will do on the Ping Phonebook as well. So that's all I have for the presentation today. Please feel free to ask us any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pallavi. What a great demo about like extensibility of Backstage according to your org's need. We had a bunch of questions in the chat, but they got answered quickly. So I don't see any unanswered question, but yeah, feel free to ask any more questions in chat and we can definitely address them later. So being conscious of time, we have about 12 minutes. So the next step or the next bit is new to this session. And we are trying to celebrate the community that we have and the awesome contributors that we have in Backstage in the past 1 month. And we have many. So we will try to do something better for the next time. But the one person which stands out for the past month, and drum rolls, please. It's Dominic from STASC. And Dominic, if you're around, everyone would like to see you. And if you'd like to say anything about contributing to Backstage or anything you want to, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. It's really awesome to work with you and to do PRs to things. We are using it quite heavily Backstage. And I'm in a fortunate position that we can, or I and my colleague Oliver can work on this full time. So we have a lot of time to experiment with it and improve it. And we're also using most of the key features like the scaffolder on tech docs and now also search, which we use and think, okay, this is cool, but we can make it cooler on some edges, and then we improve it, send PRs, discuss with you, and are improving Backstage for us and for you. And it's really fun to work on it.
It's fun to work with you as well. You've been doing great with tech docs in the past month. We all appreciate you. I guess Pulp appreciates you a lot. Yeah. Cool. Thanks so much. Looking forward to our continued collaboration, and we'll do more in future.
Definitely.
Thanks, Dominic. Next up, we have a quick feedback form, which is I'm pasting a link in the chat. This is a new type of feedback, and we are looking to know about your opinions on the phrase we use. Happy developers make happy code, or I'm so sorry, I can't read that exactly. But we want to know what you think of it and what more can Backstage do to make this true. So link in the chat, I'll paste it again at the later. But now let's go through the questions that we have on GitHub issues. So I'm going to share my screen and give me a minute. Okay, too many windows. I think this one is the right. Can someone confirm I'm sharing the GitHub issue? Okay, yep. Thank you. So this is covered. Mike and I did a demo. Ruben did a demo. This is the Splunk's demo. Yeah, so this is a good question from James. Are you around, James?
Yep, I'm in here.
Cool. So would you like me to read it, or would you like to do it yourself?
Sure, I can quickly go over it, but we're currently in the process of trying to develop golden pathways internally. We've kind of started with the scaffolder as like a base, setting up things with all of the bells and whistles and best practices. But reading through that blog post, it sounds like your golden pathways also are more of like 0 to 100, starting with local development all the way to like deploying stuff. And we're curious how you manage that in Backstage. Is it just tech docs? Do you have any like interactive code labs, or what does that look like at Spotify?
Great. So I would like to call out Austin on this one. Or no, Austin, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I needed to change microphones. Yeah, awesome. So yes, golden paths are something that are heavily used at Spotify. They are linked out to from Backstage, and they all live within tech docs. That's where they're owned and maintained. We have, I think it's maybe one thing that is maybe missed in that blog post is that we kind of have like sort of many of them. So there is one for essentially getting started, all the way from like your first day at Spotify. How do you actually get up and running, getting your machine to sort of in the state it needs to be productive. But then we also have specific ones into like how to contribute, say, into our mobile ecosystem, or how to be a data scientist at Spotify, and those kinds of things. So there's actually many of these golden paths that in some ways layer on one another. They are, at least initially, by and large, they're tutorials is I think the conceptual model that's easiest. So yes, they do have like all kinds of code snippets throughout them. They have dialogue within them. So there's usually every new joiner is going through them. And so you have comments from people going through them each week as they join Spotify. And then you have comments from people who own those documents. Usually the owners of those documents are teams that essentially like build tools in that domain. So for the mobile golden path, we have a couple of teams within our platform organization that build all the tools for those developers, and they would be the owners of that golden path. And then we have a centralized, and this is something we're still experimenting with, but like centralized tech writing to actually help improve those over time. And in some cases, that's honestly still something we're testing out. But that's kind of how you can think about golden paths. They're essentially tutorials that are interactive and people go through at the same time. We also have tied to that a boot camp that people do when they first join Spotify. So they would go through the golden paths their first week and then do a boot camp, hypothetically the second week, where they would then be able to apply those learnings in a team of other new joiners across disciplines. So that's sort of broadly how they fit within our onboarding experience and ownership and maintenance and all kinds of stuff. Hopefully that answers your question, James.
Thank you very much.
Cool. So for the next question, I'm going to call out Ben and Mike. So it's from Lou. Are you around? Would you like to ask it yourself?
Yeah, I can do. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, so it kind of actually probably relates a little bit to what Austin just mentioned. So when it comes to the templates, we've talked a lot about templates and scaffolders a lot internally before. And one of the things that has come up is one of the pain points is more around the sort of upgrade flow rather than the creation flow. So creating templates from scratch obviously is a problem for us, and it's a value add having that within Backstage. But also one of the things that we're trying to wrestle with at the moment is how to potentially make that easier to update, because obviously we've got a lot of services and projects already running. So part of the pain point is actually getting those services up to date hopefully in some sort of automated way or the easiest way possible. It's kind of interesting what you mentioned about golden paths and the documentation, Austin, as well, because I guess that is reading between the lines, potentially a little bit of an admission that it's not possible to automate absolutely everything. That I'm sure that you can automate certain pieces of that, but maybe the answer is that it's not possible to automate some of this stuff entirely. But yeah, that's the question. And yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I can jump into this one too, and then anyone else could follow along as well. I mean, so we hypothetically, we think about them as two completely different use cases. Basically, like if you're creating something new or new to Spotify, that creation flow, we leverage things like golden paths and templates built on Scaffolder to make that creation process easy and streamlined, but also consistent, using best practices out of the box. I think we then think about the sort of if I can say, like the backlog or the existing plugin, or sorry, existing components. We think about it and try and improve with using different methods. So yes, like if a standard, say we move to Kubernetes, so we're using a different container orchestrator. Great, we have all of these existing components that are not running on Kubernetes at some point in time. And so how do we sort of nudge that experience along? So there's really two things that we do. First is we try and automate whatever we can, which I think you're alluding to. So where we can, we'll completely automate that migration. We'll make teams aware that we're performing that migration, but we'll basically centralize that burden. That's kind of one of the core tenets, and make, of course, sort of manage that experience through Backstage. The second is if we can't automate it, as you say, we're actually investing quite a bit in testing out different ways to nudge and actually gamify the experience of migrating from A to B that requires work. So one example of that might be, say we have like manual auto scaling for containers or something like that. If we have managed auto scaling that we want teams to move to, but we need them to turn them on in some way, we would nudge them in Backstage by showing them the potential savings of making that transition, maybe in a way that they actually care about. So potentially in the climate impact of resources that aren't used if you move to the managed auto scaling, versus the sort of the cost or dollars that a developer may just not care about in that context at that point in time. So there's a bunch of nudges and things that we're testing. There's a whole suite of potential plugins that we're trying to externalize in different ways. So if this is an area that you're interested in or facing particular problems, then we'd love to learn more and chat about it, because we're trying to figure out like what's the right thing to bring to the community based on the learnings that we've had. So happy to chat about that in more detail, but that's kind of how we think about it at a high level.
Yeah, I was going to add some more, but I think you covered it all, to be honest. I think you did a good job. I mean, like just to add one thing, is that like Austin said that there are two separate concerns, and they are, and I think there will be probably two separate concerns in Backstage open source too. I think that like there is things that can do quick wins, like I've seen Cruft mentioned, which is like this boilerplate updating thing on top of cookiecutter, and there's been other things I've seen in issues mentioned. And I think, you know what, like we're not going to say don't go ahead and try and make something work with that. Like the scaffold is open to extension, like go ahead and try it if that works for you. But I think it will probably come in two parts in the open source part too. They are probably still going to be treated as separate concerns, really, as like the initial bootstrap of your component, and then the migrations thing is separate, like this automated change management of multiple different components, and then having PRs to track them and stuff like that. Watch this space is kind of really what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks, Ben. And this brings us to the end of this session. So thank you everyone for joining. This is a link for the feedback form, and see you on Discord and in the next community session. Have a good day all.